been struggling to figure out what to share. So for 10 years, my primary function has been to invite people to share pain and also share hope and possibility and inspiration, but mostly none of that comes without pain. And I think I naively came to that work thinking that I was prepared for what the amount of pain was going to be. And I learned the hard way that I was not. So there are a variety of stories that sort of reflect that truth for me. One of which was a very high-profile case in Milwaukee where 2 young kids were very brutally murdered. And I was in child welfare at the time, managing our operations, and I remember my boss, Mike, came to me and he gave me a file and said, why don't you start sort of gearing up on this case with the police report. And I remember reading that the youngest kid, I think he was 3 or 4, greeted the gentleman, if I can use that word, that eventually brutally murdered him with a very affectionate greeting when he came into the house. And I couldn't get that contrast out of my head. I couldn't sort of fully absorb the human truth of the pure innocence of that kid's greeting and the pure horror that came from the man he greeted. But I didn't actually understand what was happening at the time, so I got extra involved with the case. And then I had my first nightmare dream where I woke up sweating, having just sort of seen that kid who I'd never met, asking in an affectionate way to that man. And I thought that was pretty damn bizarre. And they continued for a while. And I started to become less than who I had been, both personally and professionally. And I isolated myself under the false belief that nobody would possibly understand. And a couple years ago, we were teaching law enforcement folks in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And I knew that I might tell that story in that training, so I went back in and read the police report again, and all of that pain came back. So at the right part of the training, when I'm supposed to tell this story, I broke down, I started to cry, I couldn't tell the story. And a now friend and colleague, a sheriff's deputy in Sheboygan, said, let me step in and tell mine. And he told a story about his own bad dreams from a homicide he had investigated up there. And 2 emotions came to mind, quite frankly. The first emotion was one of pure relief, and the second was one of overwhelming shame. Feeling weak, feeling powerless, and feeling ashamed of the fact that I just read the damn police report. Which meant somebody else saw the kid and investigated the crime and saw the body. And I remember thinking, man, Tim, you are weak because you just read about it, and here you are having this difficulty. And then someone taught me about what it is to sort of hold pain and sort of hold stress for too long, and the support came, and the support was received. And slowly you kind of claw your way to a better place of health. And then you have a new case, and you find out how much resilience and capacity you have, and you slowly find your way to remembering that you've had it happen and that you recovered. And so maybe you can have it happen again and recover again. And the last thing that I would say is, for me, I also learned that my vulnerabilities around pain becoming overwhelming have a lot to do with justice, with whether or not there is a conclusion that I can wrap my head around and feel okay with. The case that I reference, the two kids, my perception was justice had no way to being delivered in that case. And I think that that's part of what created the vulnerability for me. So when I read about unsolved child maltreatment or really heinous things happening to kids, and the conclusion from an investigative point of view, both from a child protection and legal perspective, is unidentified maltreater, it's really hard. Because there's nothing to wrap your arms around in terms of saying, who is the offender? How do we sort of make sense of all that, and how do we find something to sort of latch this pain to? But I've learned, much like others, that there are other people doing the same thing. There are colleagues and friends and significant others and family members who, once you let them in, can help.